but lumber going from $250 a thousand last March to $1,800 a thousand. $10,000 trucks, $40,000 to $40,000 trucks. The big conversation was, what does this big discount in futures mean to me? Everybody was expecting substantial relief from that, and all that was a gyration in a contract that trades, with a lot of people in lumber and outside of lumber. So it really didn't have any significant impact. It just showed that we may have put a short-term top in the market, but as with everything, if I knew that to be the truth, I would be doing something else in my life. We also talked about starts and permits. Interesting thing there was starts were down a bit and permits were up. Matt and Greg talked about it on our Wednesday call, Matt Beamer and Greg Riley talked about it on our Wednesday call, Matt Lehman on our Thursday call. The interesting thing we talked about was labor, logistics, and all material. Are we really going to be able to build 1.7 million houses this year? What's anticipated? And I think everybody came to the conclusion, it was an opinion, probably not. There's some constraints now with all these issues working, because labor, logistics, and material used to all be one-offs. We'd experienced maybe one of those, but now we're experiencing all three of them at the same time. So back to substantial relief, had all kinds of emails, people calling me, when's this thing going to trade off? Well, I would guess that the reason we went from $250 to $1,800 a thousand and then pulled back a little bit is people build inventory. That's why prices go up. And there's probably 90 to 120 days inventory out there at most yards. Kind of have to work through that before the prices start trading off substantially. So we'll see. There's a lot of projects out there that are waiting to be bought. So that could be an underpinning to the market. But on the platform this week, what we noticed, and we actually noticed it last week, a lot of the bids kind of started slowing down. We rolled over to more offers. So that's kind of a little change in the market. When you can digitally watch that on a screen and you watch the bids start disappearing and the offers start coming in, that's real powerful to watch. And this morning, a lot more sells up on the market, but we're starting to see a lot more people coming in and throwing some bids in also. So I would advocate going ahead and doing that. But overall, we had a little bit of a change in the market in the last 2 weeks. We'll see if it amounts to something. I would suggest tuning into our Wednesday and Thursday calls, and we'll update you on that next week. Back to you, Paul.
Hey, Ash, I wonder if you take a second. We talk a lot in terms of bids, offers, sells, asks, et cetera, et cetera. Why don't you just kind of marry that up with the traditional supply chain, purchasing, buyers, sellers, what those mean?
So, I mean, historically, in an up market, you have a lot more bids, right? A lot more people wanting to buy. When a market rolls over, or when a market slows, and there's, two things move a market: greed and fear. The greed side, you have more bids. People want to buy, and they want to accumulate, right? They want to hoard, so to speak. When the market rolls over, you see more sells and things kind of go quiet. There's always a thing they always used to talk about on the trading floors, when everything went really quiet and everything was busy and then went really quiet. That was generally, people could hear the cues in an old analog pit traded market of when it was about to roll over, right? In a digital market, you see the bids start to slow and disappear, almost come off, and the offers start to come in. So that's just, I think that was what I was kind of talking about, Paul. Does that make sense?
It does. I appreciate that. As I say, we've got a lot of first-time users on here. I come from the traditional lumber supply chain, retail, buying group, distribution side of the house. And sometimes I know that people struggle with the terminology that is very, very trader focused and market based.
Yeah. No, like I again, when we do these calls, I let these guys have their own opinions. I let Matt, Greg, and Matt make the calls on the market. I'm just the guy that gets the angry emails at 4 a.m. about how people are right and wrong. And I'm like, hey, it's not my opinion. So it's a lot of fun. I love controversy, right?
That's great.
Yep.
And Ashley does a great job, not only on the materials exchange side, but on this information side that is creating with these midweek LinkedIn Live platforms. So thank you for that, Ash.
You bet.
So we're going to pause now. We're going to turn it over to Mike Wisniewski, our CEO, who's going to talk with Tim Atkinson, who is the VP of Sales for Stimson Lumber Company. I think we've been anticipating and looking forward to this conversation. So Mike, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
All right, thank you very much, Paul. We are really privileged to have Tim Atkinson with us today. First and foremost, we appreciate the support that Stimson Lumber has given to Materials Exchange. They're an active user, listing almost every day. We have transactions flowing through with them. What I want to talk with Tim about, first off, welcome, Tim. Oh, Tim, you're on mute. There you go.
There we go. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks for the invite.
Oh, this is great. So give us just a real quick rundown of how you got to sit in that chair as the VP of Sales at Stimson.
Sure. Well, it all started about 24 years ago. Started out in the sales and marketing group, and really it was on the panels, plywood side. Worked in that realm for a couple years, and then there was an opportunity out at the mill, and went out to the mill and worked in the mill for about 3.5, 4 years. Ran anything from a swing shift sawmill to the dry end with the dry kilns, to a dimension mill, planing side of things, and then a stud planer as well. And then home centers were kind of booming, and I moved into the managing the home center business, and it kind of went from there until Steve Schmidt retired, and had an opportunity to take over the VP position.
That's fantastic. Definitely have some sawdust under your fingernails still, probably, I'm sure.
Definitely. I definitely enjoy going out to the mills and seeing the equipment, seeing the people, and it's good to see.
Give us just a quick background as well about the company Stimson.
Sure.
I know you're a little bit of an enigma in the industry today because of the huge consolidation in these mega corporate companies. So tell us what's going on at Stimson.
Yeah, so let me just give the background. We are an integrated sawmill timber company. So we have about 600,000 acres that supply our mills, which is about 50% of our raw material that we need. And then the other 50% we get out on the market, whether it's state, federal, or industrial type material. And we support, really, it's 5 stud mills, a green dimension / cuttings or timbers mill, and then we also have a hardboard facility that does panel products there. And so, this all started 150 years ago, and company kind of had a vision for sawmilling. And when Dan Dutton came on board to be our president and CEO, he had a vision that, federal lands would soon deteriorate, and we wouldn't have the ability to buy that raw material. So we needed to self-sustain. And that's when we really started to expand and look at a lot of different timber purchases. And with that came mills. And so we expanded in the early times from only a few mills to up to 14 mills. And we had every product line from plywood to glue lams to pine, cedar, studs, dimension. And so we got just, I would say, big. And then we had a nice correction that required some diversification. So we looked and started peeling things off. And as we became a smaller company, we realized that the strategy we wanted to become and where we were good at was producing stud commodity lumber for the home centers. And that really got us through the slow times. And from there, our current president, Andrew Miller, really looked at the strategy for both the employee side as well as the sales side is stability. And what's worse for an employee to come in and not know if you're going to be here tomorrow or what your job is going to be tomorrow. So we wanted to make sure that every employee knew every day, I'm going to run this piece of equipment. And in order to secure that, the retail or the home center business was the anchor. So we really started with the home center business at that point and built from there. And today it runs about 60% of our business. And then we fall into other categories, which would be the industrial side, your pallets, pellet cut up, your remanners. That's a good piece of the business. And then we also have the distribution base and then the wholesale base. And they all play a significant role, and they shift from time to time depending on what markets are doing, and what kind of requests we're getting. The last kind of piece that we explored several years back was, online sales, and was the industry ready for online, and how do you gear a sales department for, future online sales? And we had a lot of stumbling blocks in that, and had a lot of conversations with your group as well. And the platforms that were offered in, I'd say, the lumber industry's software packages were not robust enough. And so that's why we've looked at Materials Exchange and looked at that as a viable option for a future piece of the business to help with that. So that's kind of the background, is how we got into, supporting the home center and really driving our business in that direction.
You touched on the industrial part. Is the way you have to cut to get the home center product, does that leave you with a greater portion of industrial type items? Is that fair to say?
Well, I'm going to say no as a quick answer. And the reason I say that, you can do anything you want with scanners today. There's a lot of different technology that allows you to play around with whether you want different knot structures or skip, wane, and any deviations that come in the wood. So obviously you have to pull for a grade. That's the first and foremost. And then what you do with the remaining grade is, up to each sawmill, and they all have a little different philosophy. So if you look at it as just a sheer piece count through the mill, as you chase more low grade, and it depends on market pricing, as you chase more low grade or try to get more out of that wood, you end up getting a higher piece count, and that affects things downstream. So it depends on the mill and how the mill's set up and the technology that the mill has, whether they can handle certain things, whether you're a chipping mill or where you have chipping heads on the equipment, or whether you have just a true, quad or a true breakdown system. So it all depends, what each mill wants to go chase and how that model is profitable at the end of the day.
Right. It is fascinating how much technology is at that sawmill now. And
Absolutely.
in a microsecond, that mill can figure out this is going to be the best way to cut this log and to get the best return.
Yeah, and there's a lot of models that you can run secondarily and do certain checks to say, hey, if I change this parameter or that parameter, what would the outcome be? And so our industry's, I'm going to say, always kind of been lagging on technology, and I see, especially in periods like we are today, where there's a lot of cash infusion into these companies, you're going to start seeing a lot more updating of technology, updating of mills, a lot of extra capital spend going into them, because there is only so much, CapEx well, I should say, there's only so many companies you can try and buy and consolidate, and there's other opportunities to spend your cash on increasing, how well you can cut, or even how your production speeds can go. So we will see some capital infusion, definitely.
So, all right, you're an integrated producer. You're cutting 50% of your own fiber, your own logs. It doesn't take a real financial analyst to look at where the prices are today versus historically and say, they're killing it. They're making so much money. A question that I have in my mind is, okay, if they're making all this money, why wouldn't they want to make more money and produce more?
Sure.
So can you speak to that a little bit? Like, what's going on? Why wouldn't you, or are you trying to increase your production? What is there a sweet spot? What do you think?
Yeah, so great question. And, one, just to touch on the market, yes, we are at record levels. It is frustrating for, some downstream customers trying to understand how that works. But, go back and remember some of the times when the housing industry was in the toilet and the mills were barely scraping by and just, digging a big hole with cash, basically. And markets flex, they go up and down. So the big thing with a sawmill is you don't want to get caught basically down line without having a good cash position, because there is a down market. It's coming at some point. We just don't know when. So when we look at that, when there are good times, yes, we do increase production as much as we can. And so our mills are running full tilt at today's market, and we have since last, I'm going to say end of March. We were one of probably few that actually increased production during the onset of the pandemic. And part of that was because of the home center demand. The home center demand was so strong, we had an opportunity to increase our production. So we did. So we've been running overtime since the onset. Now, in order to increase even further, it requires capital investment. And so the second thing that we need to look at is long-term, can you sustain higher run rates with the current available log supply or the basket that you have of logs? And so when you start looking at the West is basically operating to the forest. We've had larger fires lately that has infused some logs into the system and kept log prices at a modest level. But once you start bringing in the world economies with export logs and then increased production from sawmilling, you start putting pressure on the logs, and we just don't have the amount of logs in the West that you can increase production at a high rate. So there is a balance there that you have where you shift us to the inland side. We have a little bit more ability for availability of logs. And then you start looking at where the expansion is going to be. It's going to be the South. And that's where obviously the dollars have been going and people have been increasing at a fast rate. But you also got to keep in mind that the equipment, it can't get installed in, a 3-4 month period. It sometimes takes a year and a half, 2 years to get equipment installed, and equipment manufacturers now have a long lead time as well. And then lastly, labor. When you want to go get that installed, you need electricians, you need millwrights, and labor becomes a big issue as well. So there's a lot of stumbling blocks along the way to say, hey, if I want to double my production, how long would it take? It's going to take a significant amount of time if you don't have the log, you don't have the equipment, and you don't have the employees.
Yeah, the employee thing is it's got to be a challenge. There's no doubt.
It definitely is. And I think it's a challenge everywhere. I mean, you mentioned, or Ashley mentioned the housing aspect of it. And I heard a report yesterday to get to 1.7 million starts, you would need an extra 400,000 construction workers to accomplish that. So how and where do you find 400,000 construction workers today?
Especially when you have a closed border and
Exactly.
You're not letting.
Yep. So it's interesting to try and project that out and see where you could be in the future when labor is such a struggle.
So watched futures open this morning, and there was a trade in May of 22, $935. I mean, using that as a guide, it's a juicy market going forward, right? So, Stimson is going to generate a bunch of cash, theoretically, projecting forward, right? What do we do with that pile of cash? I mean, I understand the hole that was dug in bad times, and you want to fill that in. But at some point, are we buying more logs, and then we see log costs go up? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And, you know, a lot of it comes down to each individual company, what they want to do, whether it's their shareholders or how they want to drive the organization forward. And, you know, Stimson's been very happy where we're at and in operating, you know, our mills. So I guess times will tell. It comes down to really the shareholders and how they want to spend their cash and how they want to grow the company for the next generation. So I guess that's a question that will have to be answered over time. And, you know, as you mentioned, markets go up and down. You know, we will infuse some cash for, you know, CapEx, you know, projects. And those are ones that have been on the radar for years that we, you know, have a plan for, and we will follow through with those, but there will be some hiccups, I'm sure, along the way with the vendors that we get the product from.
Okay, let's talk about your product mix real quick.
Sure.
It's like a bowl of mixed vegetable soup with you guys. Every day it comes out. I got ESLP, Hemfer, dry, wet, or green. What drives that? I mean, it's obviously the fiber, but how do you get so many different logs?
Yeah, so I mean, but that's a great question. And so when you start looking at the West, it's a lot less. You know, our Forest Grove and Tillamook mill, those two have less species options. There's really only 3 there: Doug fir, Hemfer, and SPF. When you get into inland, you start getting, you know, more options. You know, we add the cedar component, you add the ESLP, and then you have your Doug fir, Hemfer, or Doug fir larch, Hemfer. So yes, we do have a lot of species, and I guess it comes down to, you know, the function of our loggers really finding the available fiber, or, you know, what we have on our lands to be able to saw. And that is part, I think, of why we are successful, is we have options at times when others may not have options, and that's helpful to us. So we're always looking for, you know, the right product to put through the mill that's efficient, and we stick to those items. But there's an occasional, you know, you get some random things through there on the species side. Shifting kind of the product side, we're really a pretty stable product. It's really 7 foot through 10 foot, depending on the mill, and it's commodity studs, 2x4, limited 2x6, and then you also get the, you know, 2x3 component and your 1 inch.
Now, do the home center people care too much about the species?
It depends on region. I would say, you know, it's becoming more prevalent that Doug fir #2 seems to be the driver in most of it. And I think my personal opinion is the architecture engineering world, that's the easiest thing to spec when you know, design a house. And
Strongest,
that's
right.
And that is, you know, obviously all your, you know, hurricane or tornado, you know, your coastline, that's all your #2 product. So that becomes a highly desired product. But there's times too that it really doesn't matter. They're just looking for a stick. Mainly on the multifamily side, you're seeing that happen, where it's just, hey, we need a stick of lumber and we'll take any species.
So I witnessed in Chicago, and Chicago was an SPF market back in the 90s. That was it. Western SPF, that's the only stud you could sell. And then all of a sudden the home centers started bringing in Hemfer, and now it's any fine stick market.
Sure.
Do you see that happening in other markets as well?
You know, I do. And the reason I say that is, one, we are a world economy. Dynamics have shifted. You know, you mentioned that SPF. Well, just look at what happened with BC, the beetle kill, the fires, the reduced production. Now it's all kind of shifting to southern yellow pine. So, you know, you could use that same analogy. Is southern yellow pine, you know, how far is that going to expand, you know, north or west? And I think as you have availability issues or shortages, people are more willing to expand their parameters and look at different options.
With the home centers, is it the tail wagging the dog from time to time where, they can dictate more to you, like, you got to do this, you got to do that? Or is it really the mill kicks out what the mill kicks out?
I think it's probably twofold, and it's no different than a distributor. If you went to a distributor and says, hey, what's your ideal mix? And they came back and told us, it's still going to be the same answer. Here's what the mill can produce efficiently. If you want these other items, here's how you have to price them to get them. And that's a decision that the distributor or even a home center needs to make. I think it's been over the years, that tail wagging the dog has changed a little bit. And I think it's been more of a partnership in, hey, we need volume on the home center side. How do we maintain that volume, but still have a working relationship that, both companies can grow. And I think that's what a lot of people, seek out the home centers for is, long-term growth. And that's, where we've seen it.
Okay. So the users of materials exchange are not the home centers yet, but what can they expect, or how can they become a partner with Stimson? Like, what's the ideal relationship you would have with that segment? Obviously, like you said, your structure is home center and then distribution and then wholesale, right?
Yep.
Every stick you make gets sold, right? So what's the item that they should look to Stimson for that would be
I think I'm going to spin this a little different. We have a goal and the customer has a goal. The customer's goal obviously is to procure wood products, and our goal is to sell what we yield from the log. And really aligning those two functions is the number one goal. And we've found over time the efficiencies for both of us are having upfront conversations to say, hey, this is honestly what we can produce. This is honestly what you need. And how do you pair those two functions together and look at it as a long-term program or a long-term solution versus a, hey, I'm in and out of the market every day. Those are more cyclical or, lots of ups and downs. And so we like somebody to come to us and say, hey, we need X of this. Can you do it? If you can't, how much can you do and how long of a period can you do it? And that's the stability that I would go back to with our employee base is that they know every day they're going to walk into the mill and they're going to run that machine for the same item every day until technology or something changes with that facility.
So let's talk about long-term order files. It's definitely an interesting topic because they seem to grow and shrink, and it's not a smooth growth or shrinking all the time. How do you approach order file, and what's your strategy as far as how far will you go out, how much of your production is actually in that, and with obviously takeaway at the home center, you can't predict what it's going to be in 8 weeks or 6 weeks.
Great question. And I'll kind of start with some background things that the company has done. We actually do run forecast models, and that's what we sell from. So we have both, we have a demand plan process that basically loads in the production, loads in the commitments, and then what's left is what is going to go on the open market. And so we strategically look at that on a yearly basis and then break it down into different chunks and determine how far we want to go out on an order file based on what market is doing. And obviously in today's market, you're going to go as far out as the customer is willing to, write you a PO for. And then, when you have those markets that are peeling back, you're living on the order file. And the ideal order file, in my opinion, we like to see it at that kind of 2 to 3 week window. That would be, great in a normal operating market, and you can kind of up and down, in that. But when you get into supply demand constraints like we are today, we will book just like anyone as far out as someone wants to give you a PO.
What if someone comes and says next fall? How will we do a car a month next fall, firm priced?
We would look at it. It just depends on what we feel the right pricing model is between the two of us. So yes, we typically don't get into that. Those are usually more program based. Hey, what are you looking for? But if somebody, says, hey, I just want, one, apologize here. If I just want one car in October, we typically wouldn't do that. But if somebody came to us and said, hey, here's a menu of items, what would you do it for? We'd look at that. We'd try and take care of the customer in that respect.
Okay, cool. We're definitely got our half an hour in here. Let's wrap up with the question that we ask every week. And, what is something Tim Atkinson sees out there that no one else sees in our market, in the product? What's something you see coming down the road? I mean, we are an old school industry. Stimson's been around for 150 years. So sometimes we're resistant to change, but what do you think is going to be different?
Yeah, I'm going to swing this one a little different. It's probably on people's horizons, but, fire season's approaching us. And I really feel that over, the last few years, we've had these extreme fire seasons, and people need to keep that in mind, that it does and will drive markets, in the future if we continue to have these large fire seasons. I mean, just look at what British Columbia, what has happened there, and it just in the Northwest with the fires. That could be a game changer for, just supply chain over time, and the disruptions that it could have, and the shifts in thinking over time. So that's my big thing, that I'm kind of looking at the fire season and trying to understand, how is that going to impact overall markets if there is a mega fire or something catastrophic like that. It will take out supply, and it does, deteriorate after that kind of year and a half point after a fire. It makes it difficult to recover.
Yeah, well, it takes out supply, and then it artificially adds in supply. All of a sudden you have a bunch of logs. It adds volatility, really, is what it comes
Absolutely.
to.
Yep.
And are you guys prepared for that a little bit? Increase the log deck going into this time of year, or?
No, we always have forecasts. So we, run to plan, and we're at plan. So that's positive. But I think everybody, just depends where you're located, does things a little bit differently. Just like when they go into, winter season for breakup, they do things differently there too. So, but no, we're not doing anything strategically different there.
Cool. This was great. We appreciate your candid responses. Of course, we appreciate Stimson's support of Materials Exchange. I know we're going to grow together. Tim, we wish you guys the best of luck out there. Keep making that great product. And I just really appreciate you being on the call.
Thanks. Appreciate you having me.
All right, back to you, Paul.
All right. Hey, thanks, guys. I appreciate that very much. Tim, I appreciated your comments about, trying to understand what the market's looking for as well. One of the things that we propose to our users, particularly buyers, is that they don't have to wake up every morning and simply browse what the market is offering, that they can use the exchange as a vehicle to raise their hand and say, here's what I'm looking for. and perhaps at what price I'm looking for. But at least if they continuously raise their hand up and say, I'm looking for this, or so, it provides kind of a two-way visibility to the marketplace. So I appreciated that perspective very much. And with that, we'll wrap up. It's Friday. Thanks again, Tim. Next week, you'll see Todd DeWalt from the Construction Leading Edge, who runs an industry podcast that Mike has been involved with and has been on as a guest as well. And you'll see him next week. And just once again, thank you for your support. If you have any questions, comments, or feedback, send them to me. And have a great weekend, everybody. Take care.